summer. Normally, I just, would not be an issue.
I see. The air conditioning is always to install it is always a very painful experience for me. And I don't know why that is, but that's always the case. And Ken, I think that we are live right now. Uh,
Great. Hi.
hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to another episode of Maestro's Corner here for Cleveland Opera Theater Opera 101. My name is Domenico Boyajan, and I'm music director of Cleveland Opera Theater, and we have a special guest, another special guest here today, Mr. Ken Benson, who is an artist manager. And if I ask him, what have you seen in your days in this business, he probably is going to say, what I have not seen. Welcome, Ken. We are very happy to have you.
Thanks, Domenico. It's great to be with you, and great to be with you all. What I have seen, I'll just give you the groundwork, is that I discovered opera and the arts when I was about 12 years old, and I lived in Brooklyn, which meant very, very easy access to Manhattan, where everything was happening.
That's
So
right.
I figured out that subway route very quickly, and from the age of 12, had this treasure chest of opera and theater and dance and concerts, and so it was an amazing time.
Absolutely. Speaking of Manhattan, first let me just ask you, how are you? Are you safe? Are you healthy? Are you okay? Is your family okay?
Thank you. Yes, we are definitely among the lucky ones. I'm not actually in the Paris Opera. I'm on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is where I live. And when everything shut down in New York, it just made sense that that's where I would stay. I am healthy, and everyone close to me is. It was a very scary few weeks in New York. We've basically been very careful, a lot of us, most of us, and we've come through hopefully the worst for now. And it's the new normal. But as things could go, I am definitely, I would say, on the lucky side of things for sure.
Yeah, it is. It is the new normal, and hopefully not for long. I know we still have to hang in there, and people be patient. Just do what is safe for you and also safe for others.
Exactly.
It's imperative that we understand that we are in this together. Uh,
Exactly.
your
Exactly.
family, my family, no one is immune to anything that has to do with public health. So that's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Being a real New Yorker, I live on public transportation. So right
yeah,
up until into March, I was taking the subways and the buses all the time. And I think that's something of a miracle that I survived that experience, because I think we are so crowded together in New York.
to me, it tells me that you wash your hands. That's
I
what that
do. I,
means.
I was washing my hands, and also I was wearing a mask before it was even a thing. There was a
Good for
certain
you.
point at which I just thought, I don't know, germs communicating, we're close. It's not a big deal to wear a mask. So
Good for you. Good
I
for
was a
you.
little bit ahead of the game on that.
Ahead of the curve. That's right. So, how does one do what you do? How would you did you think about when you were 12 years old? Hey, when I grow up, I'm going to manage crazy artists.
I didn't even know such a job existed.
Mhm.
As I said, I became sort of a real opera nut from about age 12 on. And my parents and my family didn't know what to make of all this, because there was no real love for opera, classical singing. My family loved musical theater, and that was our main pleasure that we shared. No, I just was this opera fan. I honestly didn't know that all of the jobs around singing existed. Um, I always say that if I had known at the age of 15 or 16, I would have been the best Santa Fe summer apprentice, running around getting things. But I didn't know that existed. I thought you either sang or you weren't part of opera. So
Yeah.
I had a career in advertising in my early mid 20s,
Oh, interesting.
and that was great, and I enjoyed it. I think back very fondly to that time. Um, but then in my later 20s, I had a friend who was in artist management, and we were having lunch one day, and he said, you'd be perfect as an artist manager. I said, but how could that be? I've never seen a contract.
Uh-huh.
He said, contracts are all variations on each other. Once you learn what to look for, dates, fee, conditions, they're all just variations. But you've got the information that's hard to learn. You've got good ears, you know a lot of repertoire, you have a sense of voices, how they should develop. And it was really one of those kind of light bulb going on moments, because what I thought up until then was just a huge collection of opera trivia suddenly became, in fact, useful information. And I do say I'm blessed with a very good memory. And going to all of those performances as a kid, a teenager in my early 20s, I kind of remembered a lot. And it was a time that they did a lot of obscure concert operas in New York at Carnegie Hall. So I might hear a rare bel canto or Slavic or Donizetti opera. And not that I could go out and sing it, but I had a sense of the requirements. So suddenly I realized that that was information I could share with singers, that
Yeah.
was something. I had all of these years of background that they, and in a major musical city, that they might not have had access to. So that was the deal. And then again, I kind of, there's no one path to being a manager. It's really interesting with all of the different programs and young artists and apprentice programs we have for almost, certainly there's a lot in arts administration through
Uh-huh.
Opera America and other organizations. But there's almost nothing that I'm aware of how to train to become an artist manager.
Yeah.
It seems like we all find our way through different routes and back doors.
Yeah.
Many people started off to be singers, and they decided at a certain point that they were interested in artist management. And that does make sense, because if you've trained to be a singer, you've got quite a few of the skills already. You have the vocabulary, you have a sense of languages, you can,
Absolutely.
so that's a kind of realistic background, excuse me.
Yeah.
But people find various routes. So once this friend turned on that light bulb, I had a very dear friend. We went to high school together. We're still friends to this day. And he was a film editor, but he also wanted to change, and he was just obsessed with singing and opera.
Hmm.
And we had this idea to form a partnership. It was a very fertile time. It was probably the late 70s, and it was a time that there was a tremendous
Golden
amount.
years.
Yeah, it was golden years, certainly for singing, and
Hmm.
also for artist management in a way. It
Yeah.
was a time that there was a lot of just new activity and new talent in that area. So we started our own partnership. We worked out of his apartment, and we had so many colleagues at that time.
Yeah.
People like Betsy Crittenden, Peter Ransman, Paul Cote, some of whom were still in the business. And we all started in smaller or more independent agencies, and we all supported each other. We quickly formed a sort of support group. And
I
if
see.
we got an offer, we'd say, okay, let me think about that. And we'd call our colleagues, and
Nice.
this is long before email. And we
Yeah.
would call our colleagues and say, I got this offer. How does this sound to you? And they'd say, oh, that's great. Take it, or you can do better. I think I always had a very good instinctive feel for developing talent. One thing I think that I'm happy about in becoming an artist manager is I never wanted to be a singer. As much as I love it,
Yeah.
I'm not someone who is sorry I didn't have a singing career and is living it out vicariously. I think the way I look at it is I still to this day admire talent so much that I like finding a way to ease and smooth the path for the talent to get in the door and get on the stage.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And still to this day, I've seen thousands of vocal performances in my life. And every once in a while, it even happened this spring, just before the shutdown, when a singer will be there doing it, singing a difficult aria or song exposed by themselves. And I'll think, how do they do that? How do they
Yeah.
really do that? It's something of a miracle. I mean, it's something I live with every day,
Yeah.
but it's still an incredible thing to me.
So when magic happens, you always have to find some reasons. Why is this happening? How is this happening? How am I still feeling the same things that I felt 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they
Yeah.
are just fresh? What's incredible about what all of us are doing, you in creating the opportunity to make magic, and us trying really hard to create that magical moment, thanks to wonderful composers, thank God, is refreshing, and is it goes back to our instinct of being human beings. It's
Yeah.
new every time. It's new every
Yeah.
time. And let me
Yeah.
just tell you, every time your name popped up in conversations about opera and during my travels and in this theater and that theater, everyone had so many wonderful things to say about you.
Thank
So
you. That's
uh,
nice to hear.
you're making a difference for people that are working in a very very tough business, and what I've realized from asking, I like to ask a few of the same questions to
Mhm.
everyone. So two things come to mind. One, there is no one path to do what we do. It just doesn't exist. There's an ideal one, but we understand that the ideal situation most likely never presents itself. And
Correct.
secondly, you have to have the right personality to do what you do. You have to be you have to be an artist manager. You can't be anything else.
Yeah.
Singers, you just have to be a singer to do what you do. You have to be in that mindset. Same thing for conductors, and so that's very interesting, I think, to find out. That's why
Yeah.
you.
Well, no, I mean, in retrospect, I mean, as I said, I went through into my 20s, not even knowing, barely knowing that an artist manager existed. And
Yeah.
suddenly it became the most natural thing in the world. I did one of those personality tests, a Myers-Briggs test about what would be the perfect career.
What
Mine, I don't think it included artist manager. Mine came out as therapist, which is not actually not a bad
it's true.
second
It's
choice
not too far from what you're doing right now. It's not far.
because it is so much a people skill. I mean, you were saying
Absolutely.
I had the right personality. It starts with loving singers and wanting to support singers or conductors or stage directors, but then you've got to work with people. It's still a people business. As technologically oriented as we become over the decades, it still is a personality communication business.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
certain opera companies are going to prefer to work with one manager more than another. They're going to respond to one, singer. And another word we use, we say artist manager. It's also artist representative because we are representing the artist. I
Yeah.
always feel that singing or conducting is more than a full-time job as it is. So you want someone representing you who you feel comfortable with their style and that they'll have your best interest at all times. So it is literally representing the artist while they're in a rehearsal room or in a lesson or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I think that everyone has a special relationship with a specific theater. I have one with the theater in Bologna. Why? Because not only my dad sang there, but it was 200 meters away from where I lived. I saw all kinds of people, even classical Pollini, Yevgeny Kissin. I've seen opera perform. My first Wozzeck was in Teatro Comunale di Bologna. So that's my special relationship with that theater. You probably have a special relationship with the Met.
I would have to say yes, because it's where I would say especially the old Met,
Mhm.
which I always say is where I grew up. I mean, not all young singers know this, but the original Met was on 39th Street and Broadway, and it existed from 1883 to 1966. In fact, there's a wonderful documentary that came out about 2 years ago called The Opera House, which is
I
great.
haven't seen it. I'll check
It's
it out.
really
I will.
well done and puts this in perspective. And then in 1966, the Met, as we know it, moved to Lincoln Center. So it's already got a great history there. And I'd say just for sheer numbers of performances and memories and experiences, those two theaters. The reason I chose this background of the Paris Opera, I've always been drawn to French repertoire, French music, to Paris, especially of that era. I think if I could go back in time, probably the later 19th century in Paris would be my first destination, although there'd be many.
Okay.
But I think but I thank goodness. I mean, being you're a musician and I'm an agent or manager. Thank goodness we love a huge range of repertoire. It would be
Absolutely.
terrible to work in our fields and only like one small corner of the repertoire.
Yeah.
But luckily, I've always been open. I'll go to hear anything once and twice maybe, and it is that's been one of the side bonuses of this strange period we're in now, this quarantine, is there's always been a lot available online, but what has now been made available by opera houses is just crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, we could be watching 24 hours and still only skimming the top of the surface of what's
That's right.
available.
That's right.
So that's been sort of a side bonus, but
That's right. That's right. Um, Speaking of music and how much there is out there, I mean, it's just incredible. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a pianist friend of mine. He lives in Sevilla, and he said that uh, operas with Sevilla in it are, including the ones in the standard rep.
yeah,
There's about 120
really,
of them.
really,
It's incredible. Of course, Carmen. Of course, Barber of Seville.
right.
But
Isn't this Fidelio also take place in
it's Fidelio, correct?
Fidelio?
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right. I mean,
great.
it's just incredible. That's just with that one city. I mean, you can imagine, you know. So who is that? And this is a difficult question that is tough to answer. But who is that one composer that when you see on a, they are producing an opera of his or hers, say, I don't care who's singing. I know that whatever opera he or she wrote is going to be absolutely incredible.
You know what, composer, and there's no way to really, I think it happens so early, sometimes you can't explain it. It's more of an emotional
Yeah,
response.
exactly,
I
exactly.
will say, this is not my answer. I will say I have a deep place in my heart for Tchaikovsky. If I had one desert island composer, it would probably be Tchaikovsky. But
Yeah.
from from the earliest age, the music of Richard Strauss spoke to me. I couldn't possibly have begun to understand those operas at 12. But
Hmm.
among the first operas I saw were Rosenkavalier and Salome. And I love, to this day, I'll just hear Strauss and it just vibrates. It's in my DNA somehow. And the way he wrote, especially for the soprano voice, just is, and for the orchestra, is just incredible to me.
You know, I hope there is non-opera goers listening to this right now, or people that are at least interested in at least exploring it a little bit, because you touched on a very important point. Uh, I haven't used the musical terms to describe anything. You haven't used the musical terms to describe anything. It's just a feeling.
Right.
And I need people to understand, and I'm on a mission. I've been on a mission for many years,
Good.
that it's okay if you can't verbalize what you liked or what you didn't like. It's your only job is to have an opinion. Either
Right.
you like it
Yeah.
or not.
Well, to be open and then have the opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Again, as I always say, you don't have to be a chef to enjoy a good meal at a restaurant. You don't
exactly.
have to tell me how many notes of chocolate and blueberry are in a glass of wine. No one does that, and the people that actually do that are crazy to me. Uh,
It's
it,
always interesting to take a friend to the opera for the first time. And I always probably
and thank you
overthink
for doing
that.
that, by the way. Thank
I,
you for
I
doing.
try, and it's really interesting to hear their impressions. And of course, sometimes they're a little bit inhibited about describing their impressions, but I find their intuitions are very often spot on. They may not use the same terms that we would use,
Yeah.
but they're getting it. And it's really fascinating for me to hear early responses.
Well, it's how humans started communicating for the first time among themselves is through singing. I don't think they started having conversations about how high this note was and why is this important. And it's just singing. It's very basic.
Well, I think music is a primal form of communication, and to me, the human voice even intensifies that more. I mean,
Absolutely.
that makes it even more primal. Can I ask you if you have a specific composer that?
Yeah, and I'm going to give you the stereotypical answer. Uh, to me, it has to be Puccini. There is to me, this is just my opinion, not Cleveland Opera Theater's, no one else's. Uh, it, my mind explodes every time I'm on a score and I realize the colors that this guy was able to inject in the score and how perfect everything is musically, instrumenting orchestrating the piece, words wise, the libretto, um, directions, like on
Yes,
theater. He is
absolutely.
the most perfect a theater person that I had the pleasure to conduct because he understands timing. And one of the secrets of life is timing.
Yes.
It's just I don't care what it is, what opera it is. I know definitely that I'm going to enjoy. I conducted Bohème, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. Every time is like a new experience. I like to start it from you know from scratch. I
Yeah.
start from the beginning.
Yeah, well, because you're at a different point in your life, you've changed, you've evolved, and you come back to the piece after some life experience, which is a
Yeah,
big part of it. I agree. I think Puccini is a genius. In fact, he is one of the most popular opera composers, but I think he's in some ways underrated in the pantheon of composers.
I
And,
agree.
and I think that's a shame. I agree with you in every way. I think no composer wrote stage directions into the music and orchestration more than Puccini did. It's uncanny. And when I hear a piece, even like Tosca, I can hear it 1,000 times and I still marvel at it. And some of the operas that are not quite as popular, like the Tridico or Fanciulla del West, I think are genius. I think you need to hear them more than one time. I think
Yeah,
one can hear, Rigoletto, and it's got more formula melodies. You can hear La
yeah,
Donna Mobile and take it away.
absolutely.
You can't hear Che Gelli Manina and take it away the first time. But then once it gets under your skin, then you can't get rid of it. No, I
He
adore
just
Puccini.
understood people. He understood women. I think he writes for very strong women. Uh,
Yes.
Mimi is not a weak person. She's a very strong, independent woman. Uh, he was just able to understand these people
Yes.
and give them proper musical moments, not just
And even though someone like Mimi is vulnerable, I agree that she is strong. I mean, she's not
but
a victim.
exactly. I mean, vulnerability, as you and I know, it has nothing to do with weakness.
No, it actually
Just
can.
it's the
I
opposite.
think actually, I'll just interject this. There's many qualities that go into making a special artist. I think vulnerability is one of the most valuable and precious, also one of the most scary to reveal. But if a singer can be secure enough to be vulnerable in front of an audience, the audience loves them. The audience crosses over that point from admiring them and liking them to loving them.
Absolutely.
It's a tricky thing to play with, and I'm not sure. Some artists just have it. Someone like Federica von Stade, charm and vulnerability were part of her from the first day she appeared on stage, and audiences adored her, from the very beginning. Victoria de Los Angeles. These are singers that had this vulnerability and still were at the same time were in total control of what they were doing at every moment.
Yeah, and
It's a great art.
yeah, and it's one of those things that it's not only difficult to express when you're acting and singing, but it's also difficult to put on paper as a composer.
Yeah.
How describing it's not just a matter of words or a melody that is in minor. It has nothing to do with that. It's just only a few people were really able to do it. Of
Yeah.
course, is he my favorite composer? It's not a fair question. It's not a fair question. Rossini is just another genius. Giuseppe Verdi, the path that the guy had from age 11 to Falstaff, I mean,
Yeah.
it's mind blowing
Yeah.
what he did in his whole lifetime and the
It's like he just kept developing over this huge long span the entire time. He just kept growing and adding and learning and developing. Well, to
wow.
me, Verdi is like Shakespeare. They're on the
Yeah,
same I mean, great, a handful of great creative geniuses.
Yeah. But Puccini is the one that is just speaks to me right in here. There's no filters. Chest is
No, I
open.
get it.
There's just like a wire that goes straight into the heart.
And you know what? That would make him very happy. He didn't write with filters. He wrote to get right here. So
You know what he was? He was a humble man, believe it or not. I went to uh, ugh, the name the name Sacco and Vanzetti, composer.
Coppola.
Coppola, thank you.
Yeah.
So I conducted at MSM.
Oh yeah, I remember. I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of his pieces, and so after a performance, I asked him, Maestro, if you had like 30 minutes, I would like to see you. He goes, why? I need stories from you. I want you to talk to me, please. He goes, yeah, of course, of course. So I went to his house, and I asked him, so have you met Toscanini? Uh, and he said, and by the way, a great person. He was an absolute gentleman, a great person, amazing personality, sweet, generous, and it's a shame that uh, he was only 100. How old was he?
101, something like that.
He should have lived another 300 years. But that's just my opinion. So I asked him, "Do you have stories about Toscanini?" He goes, "Yeah, yeah, I have. I have two stories. So the first one, and I'll do it very quick because if not, you get an Italian talking. He never stops. So the first one is his. I asked him, "What was your first memory, Maestro Toscanini?" And Toscanini said, "When I was in school during recess, the nuns were calling us back to go back into the classroom, and and no one could find me." I said, where was he? Well, Toscanini said that even in those days, he was able to find a corner of the park where he had his head laid on a little girl's lap, and they were just talking. So since those days, uh, Toscanini knew. Second story is his communication between uh, him and Puccini. I said, so Toscanini said he wrote to Puccini saying, how are you doing? I'm in wherever he was at that moment. What is it that you're doing? And Puccini writes him back saying, I'm very depressed these days because I'm not writing any operas and I'm only studying Beethoven's string quartets. And the more I study them, the more I realize how little I am.
Hmm. Hmm.
Puccini said that? Wow. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's not true, but that he was little as a composer, but
Yeah.
it just
But his own sense of that there was something greater and
it
bigger.
speaks volumes. It
You
speaks
know,
volumes.
there's a lovely little footnote to Coppola and those two artists, Puccini and Toscanini, because you probably know this. When the Metropolitan Opera did the first American performance of Turandot in like 1926, it was a
Uh,
brand new opera. Coppola was in the children's chorus. And
oh,
there's a picture of the whole stage, but they can zero in and you can see little Anton Coppola at age, whatever, 9
incredible.
or something. So that's an amazing link with history too.
So I'm just glad that we got to know him.
Yeah.
It's a connection to
Well,
Toscanini.
I often say that to young singers. I mean, this is a difficult time in New York for many reasons, or in the world, but we're actually losing a lot of our great singers. There's a lot of older singers who were just part of the New York fabric and the history. We lost Rosalind Elias, the mezzo soprano, just a couple of weeks ago, and she had a great life. She was in her 90s, but she sang in the premiere of Vanessa in 1958. Samuel Barber wrote "Must the Winter Come So Soon" for her. Eleanor Ross passed away recently. I mean, people are of an age, they're in their 90s, but I would always say to young singers, even if you have a chance to just exchange a few words with them, get some kind of contact with them. A conductor I know mentioned an interesting concept. He said, with people who have this great history, some of them can communicate it, some of it can teach, some of them cannot. But he said, I honestly believe if people to some degree by osmosis collect all of the people they've worked with or the memories or the experiences, and somehow that's there, which is interesting. Wonderful soprano Lucina Mara, who sang at the Met for almost 40 something years, still with us at 90 something, still has a voice. And we were at one of these opera gala luncheons, a winner's concert about a year ago. And this young soprano next to me said, oh, this woman I'm sitting next to is very interesting. And she said she sang at the Met for 40 years. I said, she did. And this girl was working on Ellen Orford's embroidery aria from Peter Grimes. And Lucina Mara had sung the famous Peter Grimes back in the 60s with John Vickers and Colin Davis. Before I knew it, there was Lucina Mara singing the embroidery aria at the table, singing it beautifully and accurately at 90 something. So it's an interesting time. I've always been a believer in, every time I saw these people, they were a walking part of our history, and they're not going to be there forever. So, you know, if you have any chance to encounter them, it's a good thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, as you know, my father had a great career, and
Yeah.
he worked he worked with Cami
Yes.
back in the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
And you worked with Cami. You had your own
Yes,
division.
we overlapped a little. I didn't actually specifically represent your father, but I certainly knew who he was, and I heard him and admired him. And he was represented by one of my colleagues that I esteem very much. So
Yeah.
we sort of overlapped on the Cami roster for a while in the 80s. Yeah,
Yeah, and you stayed with them for 25 years, and
25
now,
years. Yeah.
I mean, and you had your own division, right?
Yeah, I had my own division and I had my own, you know, it's a very personal thing. One thing about being a manager is it's very important to represent people that you are genuinely excited about and
You
believe in,
believe in,
because
right?
you only have your few moments to sell them, for want of a better word. And
Hmm.
whether it's on a phone or by email, so you better be genuinely enthused and excited about their work, because it does come through. Many presenters on the other side of the phone, on the buying side, the hiring side, have said we always know when managers are truly excited about a client. So
Yeah.
it's a luxury. And what's interesting is I work with some fantastic people at Cami, and then after 25 years, I left and I did a couple of years of freelancing. I did consultations, lectures, competitions, writing, things like that. And I kind of decided I hadn't used up all my managing muscles yet. There was still too much
That's
of my brain that was still working that way.
of
And I
course.
still knew a lot of people. So when I reformed my own company, my own list, it actually, I didn't really think about this, but the way it evolved is I'm working with almost exclusively younger singers, because what got me excited about coming back to management was those couple of years that I was consulting at schools. I did a lot of work at Juilliard, Manhattan School, Mannes, Yale, and I was hearing this amazing upcoming generation of new talent. And I thought, wow, there's some great young talent here. And I kind of wanted to have some input into that. So that was what finally tipped me over into recreating my own list. And it did take that form. There's something particularly exciting about laying the foundation of a career. I mean, it's great to represent an established star and get great fees and people are in demand. Of course, that's wonderful. We all love that. But there's nothing quite like the very early stages of taking a blank schedule, a blank calendar, and giving advice. I love to make a sort of ground plan with a singer. If I'm interested in working with a young singer, we'll sit down and I think it's important, again, not that I just be inspired and enthused by their talent, but that we see them the same way. In other words, we see their repertoire and their place the
Sure.
same way as they and their teacher do, that we see it advancing. I'll always say to a singer, this is where you are now. This is where it possibly can go in the next 3 to 5 years. You
Yeah.
know, so that you're exactly in sync about repertoire, what they're doing, where they're auditioning, what they're auditioning for, all of that. And there's something uniquely exciting about that part of a career, that foundation, you know? And
Mm.
sometimes people would say, well, what do you really get aside from getting a salary? What do you get out of this? And I would often say, if I had suggested a new role to a singer a couple of years previously and had been able to get them a contract for that role, and they were finally preparing it and singing it on stage and having a great success. That to me was a very special reward, feeling like I was part of that in some way. If anything, I'm very much a nurturer, so I tend to go on the more conservative, slower side of
Yeah.
repertoire.
Yeah.
I Again, because this is the school your father was from. When I grew up and first started going to the opera, I was hearing a lot of great singers sing very well until they were 60 or beyond. So to me, that was normal. You were supposed to sing till you were 60, and I still feel that way. If
Yeah.
you're singing in a healthy way and singing the right repertoire,
You said the right
you,
word.
then you can do it. And I think another thing is singers also need to learn to take care of their own vocal health. Of course, they trust their teacher and their manager, but at the end of the day, the singer knows how it feels in here. They're responsible. If they're getting tired, if something doesn't feel right, I think actually there was an interesting thread on, been a lot of interesting threads on Facebook about singing because people have more time.
That's right.
And we were talking about what an incredible, there's been various kind of real golden ages at different points. And very often they come after a period of crisis. We're having this strange crisis now. And someone said, but look at after World War II, there was this unbelievable explosion, of talent, and opera flourished in a way, it was a whole new level. And a friend of mine has always had an interesting theory about that. He's always said, what was it about post-World War II? The great singers just exploded. And his theory was that they had lived through the worst and survived and come out on the other side.
Huh.
And also they could give everything as far as passion and commitment because they had nothing more to lose. They were probably having a success on the opera stage and going home and starving because they were on rations. But I think there's probably something to that. And someone added to that conversation, yes, this all makes sense. And also at that time, singers were adored. And I can't argue with that. I mean, I grew up in the age of the singer, in the 50s, 60s, when
Absolutely.
I'm not saying they weren't great artists, but the focus was going to be not only on them, but how they were presented, how they were costumed, what they were asked to do physically or not do. It was all about making them look good, which I think Maestro Puccini probably would have approved of. I mean, he would have, it was all about showcasing the singer. And I think it's a very different world, but I think singers need to learn. I mean, they're still human, they're still fragile. These two chords are very fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're getting tired or something doesn't feel right, I think they have to be custodians and pay attention to that. And it doesn't make them divas or bad colleagues. It's just
I mean, they are carrying their own instrument everywhere they go, in any weather they go. If you're a violinist, you are careful about too cold, too hot, too humid, to this.
yes.
And if you're a singer, you probably, obviously there are extreme cases. We don't want you to do that, but you have to be aware of what it is that you are doing and consequences to your actions.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be the first person to take care of this because no one is going to worry about this
Absolutely.
more than you. So,
and you have to actually learn how to feel things.
Yes,
because you are the only one that knows.
I often say that to singers. I said, you have information that none of us have, which
That's
is how
right.
it feels.
And
So,
you somehow have to verbalize it and know how to reproduce that good sound that your teacher said this works. So what is it that you did? You just have to learn how to reproduce it because it's your.
And
it's
a lot
your,
of that is trust, just trusting.
Absolutely.
And also you're going to be singing in very different theaters with very different acoustics, a lot of different conditions. So you've got to have that barometer inside you.
Two more questions,
Sure.
Ken. This one I need suggestions for young singers, and I'll make it a little bit more difficult for you, specifically to sopranos. There's a lot of talented sopranos out there. So I'm a soprano. I know the rep. I speak 4 languages. I just finished my bachelor's. I just finished my master's. I rush in the world. I need a manager right now, because this is how it's going to happen for me. Um, I always say, through my conducting teacher that I had in Italy, Gianluigi Gelmetti, he
Mhm.
always told us it's better that you are 1 year late than 1 minute too early.
I think that's great advice. That's great advice.
Saint
And
words.
I know a lot of singers, they just, without really even understanding what a manager does, they'll say, okay, get new headshots, update my resume, get a manager.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you're absolutely right. Timing, as you said before, is everything.
What do you do as a young
And you
soprano?
don't want to reveal yourself as too much of a work in progress. I mean, on one hand, as a singer, you'll be a work in progress till the day you retire. But you want to have a level of consistency where you can rely on your technique and your foundation, and also have your own point of view to tell the story, which I think is a key to success.
Yeah.
There's a lot today more than ever with the incredible structure of young artist programs we have in studios. There's a lot that young singers can do before management, which is actually a great way to attract management. I mean, managers will always keep an eye on who's on such and such a young artist program, who's in a summer program. So
So young artist programs are important.
I think they are. I think they're
Right?
actually, in a way, more important than they ever were. I think 20 years ago, you could still have a totally freelance career with a lot of luck and auditions and all of that. I think the way things have become structured now, it's a rite of passage. I don't know how possible it would be in America to have a career without some connection to young artist program. I don't mean become a professional young artist and spend years and years on them, but they are an incredible way of building connections, of networking, meeting conductors, directors, administrators, colleagues. As I said, none of us managers can be aware of every young singer in America. We are all at least aware of who's on young artist programs. It's a kind of filter. I'm not saying that some terrific talent doesn't get into those programs. There's always a way,
Yeah.
but I just think the industry has been set up in a way now, it's almost an essential rite of passage. In other words, they're necessary, but don't stay too long, or don't become a professional young artist. Don't
Yeah,
just go,
exactly.
don't
That's
just go from program to program to program.
that's a good value. Yeah, that's good.
But anyway, as far as when you said lyric soprano, when a young singer will say that to me, sort of apologetic, well, I'm a lyric soprano. I mean, Morella Freni was a lyric soprano. So if you're special, you're special. What I find interesting is there was this amazing, the more a singer can bring of themselves to the room, to the stage, the more successful they'll be. Whatever makes you individual. I mean, something like Devieni non Tadar, Susanna's aria, it's a beautiful, beautiful aria. But in the hands of many sopranos, it's become magic. You suddenly, you're seeing the moonlight in the garden. I mean, that comes from their own personal take, their own belief. Just have something to say and tell a story. I always advise singers, by the time you walk into an audition, you can't fit in one more voice lesson or coaching. You're bringing into the room what you're going to bring in.
Absolutely.
And at that point, don't try to second guess what people might like or what they're listening for. That's your moment. If you have 5 minutes to sing, that's your mini performance. So forget about the people at the table. Just tell that story. Try to sing something you love, and then say thank you and leave the room. It's the rest is really out of your hands and out of your control. But I think two things: singing something obviously that fits your voice and shows you well is essential, but also something you love. Because I think a lot of times we get into the thing of 5 arias in 5 languages and 5 styles. I think that's spreading an artist too thin, frankly. I don't think there are very few artists who do all those things equally well.
Yeah.
And you want to go in and do what you do best. So if you're primarily a Mozart or a Handel soprano, I mean, I've seen so many wonderful tenors who they are in their DNA, they're Puccini and Verdi and Verismo tenors, but they all have to bring in Tamino's aria from the Magic Flute to show the Mozart. And you know what? If you have that on the list, they're going to ask for it. And why lose your shot? Focus
Absolutely.
the list in and say, this is who I am. What it says to me is this singer has a sense of themselves. They
Yeah.
know what they're about. because
So
very few singers could sing 5 languages, styles,
yeah,
periods equally well.
yeah. So in other words, like keep it simple, control what you can control,
Yes, great.
and
Great way to put it.
don't try to please everyone because you will never ever be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Just be true to yourself.
Absolutely. Oh,
And
exactly what you said, all of those things.
so and
Because you know what? I can think of the greatest nights I ever had at the opera, the greatest stars, where most of the audience was walking around just dazed and enthralled. You would always find somebody who said, "Oh, I didn't think so," or "She was out of tune," or "She was this."
right.
You can singing is such. That's one of the great things about the vocal art, is the response is so personal and so
Exactly.
individual. You
Exactly.
know, a dear colleague of mine once said, you know, a singer can sing in front of a panel with 5 people. They'll open their mouth and the sound will go in this ear, but then we will all process it emotionally by what our standards are, and a different result is going to come out here. And there's nothing the singer can do about that,
Very interesting.
except sing well and be true to themselves. If
That's
they're
right.
true to themselves, the rest is sort of out of their control.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So the ingredients are exactly the same, but the
But we're
result that comes
processing it
out
differently.
exactly.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Last question. So if Ken Benson weren't artist manager and or therapist, what would he have become?
Oh, probably something to do with travel, which is also not unrelated to the work that we do. I mean, I've always loved travel. I've loved history of different places. So, um, something to, I don't want, maybe a travel agent putting tours together, maybe theme tours together of literary or musical or historical trips to European countries. I'll tell you something honestly, at this point in my life where everything is more or less on hold and we're focusing, I sort of want to become, I am an archivist, because every one of those thousands of performances I attended, I still have a program from.
Oh, you
And that's
do? Oh my
in
goodness.
New York City, in a New York apartment. I have expanded to a storage room. But when
Wow.
I was a kid, it was not just go to the performance. I had to get the program, go backstage, get an autograph, take a picture. I have all this stuff. And in the last couple of weeks, I thought, what am I doing this with boxes in my closet? This should be shared at this point. So slowly but surely, I'm kind of organizing and scanning and sending it. But that's just a fun thing. I mean, the minute my work comes back, really, I'm there. I mean, I'm still there. It's just taking a very different form right now.
I love it. One day I'm going to call you and I'm going to tell you, hey, let's go through those programs. Just
I'll I'll
for
have it. I'm
me
sure.
personally.
Give me a little time and I'll find it.
Sounds good. We'll spend 2 weeks going through those programs. I
Okay.
love it. Ken, thanks so much for being here. I know you are a busy man. You're doing a lot of things, and to have you for almost an hour, it was just a pleasure to get to know you a little bit better, to hear your stories, your opinions, and it was a lovely, lovely conversation. So thank
Well,
you.
thanks so much, Domenico. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it, and the hour flew by. So invite me back sometime.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And
Take care,
one day,
everybody. Thanks for looking in.
absolutely. Thank you, Ken.